Great. So we're live on YouTube now.
Okay. We're live on YouTube now.
Yeah. Sorry. Just letting you guys
You're
know.
popular.
The
We
hot mic,
asked
hot
everybody
mic.
if we could live stream it. The other chapters.
Let me share my screen so now as well.
Something to see how the social
Yes, comments.
Thank you. I was sitting there and I went in, I was beautiful, so I saw a style. I can't do it. I'm going to be on Tuesday. And I decided, so I got yeah. And then my neck was showing. So I was like, thanks. So I went back and I was like, can I take it? And he got upset with me. I took this is the one that you're here for. So he like didn't tell me I was there or anything. I totally bad again. But I just so now we're okay. Why is that one for the selfie up? You gotta take that. It's actually better. How are you?
I'm asking the wrong person. I'm really
It's like us so. Yeah, this one but I tried today. I did it. It's picture.
Maybe that you took of yourself.
No. Did someone else take of you? Yeah.
I guess no time.
It doesn't good. It doesn't good.
I'm just gonna put it right here for now.
I tried today and it just didn't work. I was like that. No, like those are not it. They're not like a single picture that was
No. So sad. They do you dirty. They
Yeah,
do
they
you
were
dirty.
And you know what?
So bad.
I went. It was so dark. I did. It looked so like it was the camera was colors. And honestly, it's good. I could just my head or anything. You're good. And then after I started, like some white girl came with the picture and he like fixed her hair. It was like I was like scared of us. I was scared of us. I'm gonna go get shot. Yeah, I think if you can just put your name down here, thanks for coming. Of course. There's some chai in there if you'd like some. But you all clean and fresh.
I'm so disappointed by this book.
Oh, really? Why?
Yes, because it has such beautiful stuff, but then when you look at the map,
Oh, it's all wrong.
no, they just put Palestine.
Very wrong. Welcome.
No, I don't like it anymore.
And if you can just put your name on. He may already have his book, but I don't have.
Oh,
Like,
no, I'm
names,
just
faces.
I'm just not visiting.
Oh, okay.
Is it the first name? Is there one else you think?
It's first.
Help yourself to,
Yeah, so,
try and.
Tomorrow will be
I think I was thinking. Yeah, you can take any chair.
closing arguments start tomorrow, and then the jury gets to deliberate. So there'll probably be what I'm looking for, a decision by tomorrow.
Oh.
We're hoping, that's what I'm hoping for. But I won't be here. Yeah, then it can go like for a day or two. The longer it takes, the more scared I'm gonna be, because it's not a good sign for the prosecutor. I hope so. Will definitely make my job a lot easier since I won't be here. But we shall see.
No, it's okay, it's right there. I just remember, you should have in the back.
What about you?
Maybe it starts to. Yeah, if it does, it'd be like on the. No, we're good.
Maybe chilling, get some rest.
No, you're fine. Like, look and message me like, oh, I have my head. Yeah. You're good. I just wanted to, like, I know it's like last minute.
Yeah, no, you're okay.
But I'm right in. So you should remind me that it was a,
Yeah, Cordia. It came out when I first
my sister was looking at me.
I wish I came. If I knew earlier, I would have looked at it on my phone right
Yeah,
now.
no idea. It's like Sunday too.
No, it's okay. I really wanted to do that. It's sad.
Oh, it's okay.
Have some
Next time.
yesterday.
Actually, I should let you go.
That'd be so
No,
cute.
no.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it too. I was
How was it?
Yeah.
Was Valentine's Day?
like, right, tell me the name for this one.
No, it's fire. I love it.
Based off the Tribe Called Quest album.
You're so sweet.
Oh.
That's like
I was like,
Yeah,
that's
that's
kind Anyway,
I should do that.
I'm down to hang out.
No way.
Union.
Oh, celebrity.
Well, I think
You're
it's
so
gonna
smiley.
be
I love it. I'm sorry, I didn't
so
see
we
you.
can
See you. Good.
not open and late.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Always the-
So now it's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m.
I love the red.
I wonder if he changed it, because I was there at midnight until 10. That night I was there writing out the strategy for PLM. She's like,
She's a
I was there until 10:30 probably.
Has she been here the whole day?
You know what?
No, 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 I
I'm
came in.
teaching. I'm living in the place that,
I felt her trip last night.
Oh my god.
Her
Yeah,
vaccine. 4 months. God, I wish you could be. At least
I was thinking I'd be a little bit more.
I'm hoping that we are able to figure out something so we can. I think it'd be good to build up trust with them. They'll open it up to like 2 us or 4 us. I'm trying to see what kind of like. Yeah, I still haven't even paid for it this year. So I was waiting so I need everybody's emails, which I have. But then I read that I also need his birthday. So I need everybody's birthday and get them access into it. And then I'm thinking right now, I made a mistake. Because I just for their building. Yeah.
Okay, ready? Thank you.
You gotta take it because I don't know how many pictures you put in.
That's all. And like I figured, like those.
Yeah.
How many you got?
No, you got it.
How many? You're probably know all of them.
24.
I'm trying to Having a meeting with him for the Columbus Safety Board. So it's like literally over the next month, like, we could hit our $200,000 goal. Which would be
I just don't like enrichment.
yeah, I think that's amazing. And then this week, of course, tomorrow, I'll be Monday. The national funders and resources, the 24th and 25th in Chicago, trying to make things happen.
Who's on?
To be able to sit down and
That's just.
Yeah, and she's like, she's been on yeah, they are large scale. I mean, even the word that, like, maybe not. So, like, whether it's having marches, direct access.
You got me some food.
Water.
We got something that we buy, that we don't want to where to start.
How long do you think you need? Or what's your
I'll try to do everything.
we don't need an end time, just like what's your how
Only
long
that time we're
does
driving home. But
yeah for like
but
what's your
40, I would say if it's Q&A, I say I'd speak between 35 to 40 minutes.
okay, gotcha. Okay, that works. Yeah, we just don't want people to come in the middle because the door's right here. Yeah, we'll probably just
I'm trying to figure out, like,
Thank you so much. I'll get some in a second.
You're not lying. No.
Yes, not me.
I think. Case study. Like, if he's not here, speaking for them in ways that they don't speak for. There was one person in the hospital, bro. She was like, if you don't get here, I feel like there's just levels. However, when it comes to they have to be able to service. Yeah, I want to talk to you more about the idea to go to, what is it, Ohio Board of Education. I'm down to do.
I have an extra file.
About writing it. So they reached out to CAIR today, and they told me.
We're gonna get started in a few minutes, so if you need to use the restroom or grab some water or refreshments in the conference room, please do so. We'll get started around 6:50.
Then go get yeah, but.
I don't know.
Okay, I'll get
But
it.
this is sad.
Yeah,
I was like, down though. They say this is such a shared thing. Then they go to talk to Great Studies. Then they're at everybody's office, they have to make it done, and then they get the opportunity to talk to everyone. Exactly, like that's what I'm saying. Like everybody who's trying to they got to work, especially every time they go to the table. Like it's a frustrating thing. Like when they pick up their frustration, you gotta look back. Like do not try to like shut people off. Like help you deal with frustration. Like what do you think, Brad? Like that's a great shot.
What are you appreciative about?
They use it for.
Fine, whatever you want.
Really?
Neil, can you tell me what's wrong with it's starting before it.
Assalamualaikum everyone. Thank you guys for being here. If you guys haven't met me, I'm Victoria Hickox, I'm our outreach director. Really glad to see the room's full here for Imam Dawud Walid. And so I'll go ahead and pass it over to him.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki Yawm ad-Din. Wa afdalu salati wa atammu taslim. على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين لهم بخير وإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. So my brothers and sisters in Islam, first of all, let me say it's an honor and privilege to be here with you this evening. I am your needy brother Dawood. I am the executive director of the Michigan chapter of CAIR. Been there for quite a while. and also on the Imams Council of Michigan. And we are, mashallah, we are now in the 4th night of Sha'ban. May Allah bless us in this month of Sha'ban and have us live to reach the month of Ramadan. And we are also in Black History Month, and just for maybe some new information for some of you, or maybe as a reminder for others, but this month, Black History Month, February, started off as something called Negro History Week. And it was started by one of the first 2 graduates of Harvard University who's African American. And those first 2 African American luminaries are W.E.B. Du Bois, also known as W.B. Du Bois, who wrote a book called Souls of Black Folks. He's an African American intellectual. He actually made Hijra, and he and his wife gave up on the American project, and they actually passed away in Ghana. I actually visited the Du Bois Center. Then the second is Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who wrote a famous book called Miseducation of the Negro. And that's how African Americans were referred to back in those days, as Negroes. And he's the one that came up with Negro History Week, which then later became Black History Month, as a way of trying to center Black history, where in schools, public education in the North and the South, as well as in universities, there's nothing positive written about African culture or Black people here in the United States of America at that time. So Negro History Week, which then morphed into Black History Month. And there's also, maybe there's some African Americans who are watching this online, but this is a popular myth. They say, oh, they gave us Black History Month because February is the shortest month of the year. That's a myth and not true. And as I will illustrate in my talk, the dominant white culture never gave us African Americans anything without us fighting for it. They didn't give us Black History Month. We made Black History Month. We popularized it and pushed it, right? It wasn't something that just some benevolent liberals came up, who were white liberals, and said, oh, let's give these Negroes Black History Month. That's not the way that it happened. And that's not the political reality for the African American community today. And Malcolm X spoke about that. So we're talking about, inshallah, the legacy of Malcolm X, Black liberation, and Palestine. And let me begin with an ayah of the Quran. And we know that the best speech, as our Prophet ﷺ said, the best speech is the book of God, it is the Quran. So this is always the best place to start any affair, any endeavor that we do as Muslims. And it should be the place that we end. It's the bidayah and the nihayah is God's word. At least that's the way it should be. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the 33rd ayah of the Quran, Minal mu'mineen rijalun sadaku ma'ahadullah alayhi. It starts off, and from the believers are men, rijalun, who are true to what they have promised or taken their covenant with God. فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ قَضَى نَحْبَهُ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ يَنْتَظِرُ وَمَا بَدَّلُوا تَبْدِيلًا. And there are some of those in keeping this covenant with God, they are killed, they lose their lives in the process, while there are others who are awaiting, and they would not substitute anything in regarding to this matter. And just for our knowledge, this verse is directly talking about the Sahaba. So at Ghazwa Uhud, for instance, Hamza Ralwan lost life at Uhud, and also Mus'ab ibn Umair, two of the great companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then there were others who participated in Uhud, who lived but were martyred later, like Talha, like Ammar ibn Yasir, like Ali ibn Abi Talib. They were martyred later, right? So they weren't fatalistic, but they were willing to pay the ultimate cost, which is shahada. And the word for martyrdom in Arabic is the same word for bearing witness, testifying, because the ultimate testification is one stays true, he or she, to their oath, to their covenant with God, And their ultimate testification is they are willing to give what's most precious to them in this dunya, which is their life for the truth. And of course, we know the first martyr amongst the Sahaba was a woman. A black woman, actually, Sumayya. She was a black woman, not like how she looked in that movie, The Message, where they had them all looking like they were from Greece or something. This is whitewashed history. They didn't look that way, which I wrote about this in my book, Blackness in Islam. So anyway, Malcolm, just as a beginning, and I would try to paint a thread for you, was a man of sidq. He was a man that represents truth. Truth in intention, truth in speech, truth in deed, truth in his covenant. Truth, right? And this is what makes a real man and a real woman according to Islam, right? The affair starts with sidq. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a hadith that is vigorously authenticated, hadith sahih, narrated by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala and Imam Muslim rahimahullah ta'ala, says, "Alaykum bis-sidq. Inna sidq yahdi al-birr, inna birr yahdi al-jannah." Stick, you are obligated to as-sidq, the truth, sincerity, truth. Surely sincerity, truth leads to all noble, righteous traits of character, al-birr. And al-birr leads one to Jannah, to paradise. So one who lacks truthfulness cannot go to Jannah. Truthfulness. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us be amongst the truthful. Now, anytime, and I was taught this by my teachers in general, but we can apply this even when we look at socio-political things going on right now, as well as historical figures. When we look at a historical figure, we don't simply understand them by reading a text, reading a book. We understand them by the context of how the society was in which they were born into, right? And then the social factors. Hence, when we have seerah books like Seerah Ibn Hisham, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it doesn't start with seerah books. Don't simply start with, at least most of them don't start just when he was born. They start with his forefathers and how Arab society was prior to him being born, because we need to understand what were the Arabs doing for him when he was born. That then he was commissioned to be messenger, right? They were worshiping idols. People were walking around the Kaaba half naked. They were burying female babies alive. They were drinking was part of the Arab culture, and gambling, right? Tribalism, killing each other, fighting each other based upon tribal affiliation, right? So this is the context in which Al-Habib Al-Mustafa Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi was born in. Likewise, Malcolm was born into a particular socio-political context. We have to understand this context to better understand what birthed this man. And really, we are, to every brother, we are all Ibn al-Waqt, in a sense, or sister, you're bint al-Waqt. I'm a son of my time. You're a son of your time. You're a daughter of your time, right? So Malcolm was born in Omaha, Nebraska. And he was born in Omaha, Nebraska. And by the way, there's some things I probably unclear. How many of you have seen the movie called X about Malcolm X? How have you seen that? About half of you? Okay, there's some historically inaccurate things in there. It's supposed to be somewhat of a biopic, but there are certain things in there that are fictionalized and not true. So maybe I'll go through some of those. But what that does show is that Malcolm X's family was ran out of Nebraska. By who? By the most notorious terrorist organization in American history, the Ku Klux Klan, which is a Christian organization, claims to be Christian, right? The KKK burned down the family home, which then led them moving to the area of Michigan, Mason, Michigan, that's close to the University of, close to Michigan State University, right by Lansing, where they were chased out of. So Malcolm was born, and as a very young tender age, his family had to make hijrah. Why? They were fleeing persecution Just as Sahaba had to flee persecution, first going to Habasha and then going to Medina, they were fleeing persecution. His father was originally from the South. He was a Baptist pastor. I'm giving this context because Malcolm, again, didn't come from he just didn't come from a vacuum. What influenced him as a man, his geopolitical thought, comes from the environment he was birthed in. So his father was a Black pastor and part of an organization called the UNIA, the United Negro Improvement Association, that was started by a man who was Jamaican who immigrated to the United States of America by the name of Marcus Garvey. That started this organization. It was a Pan-African organization that tried to organize Black people who are descendants of slaves in the diaspora in the West to, number one, have some sort of self-pride. Number two, to cooperate culturally and also economically. And of course, we know how America was at this time, and after Reconstruction, the KKK, many Black cities were razed to the ground. There's a movie called Rosewood that mentions one such city. What's called Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. There were many race riots where Black people, African Americans, despite the odds, had thriving economic business districts that were literally destroyed and robbed under the watchful eye of the government that did absolutely nothing to protect Black people, right? So he was a part of this movement, his father. His mother was also part of this movement. And his mother, by the way, was an immigrant from the West Indies, from Grenada. His mother was, however, half white. Why? Because Malcolm's grandmother was sexually assaulted by a white man. You know, they had plantations and the sugarcane plantations and all of those things. This was something common. Even myself, my grandfather is 97 years old. I did one of those Ancestry.com tests. My DNA comes back 39%, like from Britain. Then all of these relatives started coming up, like third and fourth cousins in South Carolina. That's where my grandfather was born at. All of his siblings were very dark. He's lighter than myself with like hazel eyes and like straighter hair. And we concluded that the man that my grandfather thought was his father was actually the person who owned the plantation in which my grandfather was born as a sharecropper. So my great-grandmother worked in the big house, and most likely it was Shane, but most likely she was sexually assaulted by the white man. Hence, I have white blood in me, about 39%. It's something that was common in those days. And this isn't that long ago, by the way. If Malcolm X were alive, he would only be a few years older than my grandfather. So his mother was multilingual. I believe she could speak 4 languages. And she was a writer for the Negro World, which was the paper for the United Negro Improvement Association. Malcolm X's father died in Lansing, Michigan in the year 1931. And his family believed, as well as some family friends, including an eyewitness that said that he was pushed underneath a streetcar after being beaten and hit. And the Klan threatened Malcolm's family in Michigan. And many people think about the Ku Klux Klan in the South. But in fact, at this particular time in 1930, the state that had the largest registered amount of Klan members in America was Michigan. The Klan actually first really got its start big in Indiana, right? Not down south. This is why Malcolm X said, people talk about the South. He said anything south of Canada is the South. Ohio is the South. Michigan is the South. Indiana is the South. I mean, for African American people, right? It's not historically speaking, like the South. So this was Malcolm's background. He basically was born and raised in a background knowing that his family fled white terrorists. His family was terrorized in Michigan. he learned that his mother was sexually assaulted by a white man, right? And his father was killed by white racists. So this gives you a little background into like his sentiments, right? Where this led him to, and how America was at that time, right? And please, and by the way, when I'm saying white, I'm not indicting all white people, by the way. So please just keep it into proper context, right? So what I want to look at, without going to too much more history, though we'll touch on some more history as this presentation goes, I really want to touch on three things regarding Malcolm X. And really, we could even call this an evolution of revolution, we can say. We can say it's the evolution of revolution, or it's revolutionary evolution. Maybe we want to use that term. But Malcolm's life, as I read it and look at it, and also talking to some of his family members, like speaking directly with his nephew, who's still alive in Boston, Massachusetts, and the children, you know, that these are some things I think I've gleaned. And by the way, you know, we need more research on Malcolm X as a Muslim community. You know, very few PhD dissertations have actually been written by Muslims. The vast majority of those have been written by people who aren't Muslims. And it's good that they do that, but the Islamic aspect is written about as something tertiary, if at all. Right? Tertiary, if at all. And this is our duty as American Muslims. And I think that until we write about the likes of him and critically study it so that we can grow, I think there should be an annual Malcolm X conference every year, not in February. For the acculturation and establishment of Islam in America. And this is natural amongst any place where Islam is spread. They venerate and show, and they pay proper due and respect for the people that helped establish Islam in that land and or help revival of Islam. For instance, Allama Muhammad Iqbal, the great Pakistani poet. There's annual conferences about Iqbal. Even in Iran, because he wrote poetry in Farsi. They have an annual Iqbal conference every year in Iran. He wasn't even Iranian, right? But Iqbal is respected amongst Pakistanis. Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba in Senegal, for instance, another great scholar of the 19th century. There's an annual Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba Day, right? People show respect for their scholars and for people who they consider to be of the Salihin or the Awliya Allah. This is likewise, as Dr. Umar Farouk Abdullah said, Hafidullah Ta'ala, one of our teachers who's in Chicagoland, he said, if there's anyone who's a wali of Allah in America, in this land, it had to have been Malcolm X. He said, Malcolm X is like our Imam Hussein in America. So his revolutions in three: the internal struggle with inside his own self to reform himself morally. Number two, the internalizing calling Black people to reform themselves, but as well as other colonized people, not just from moral vice, but also unshackling the minds of the people, of the colonialized mind. Or as Dr. Naeem Akbar wrote a book about this, may Allah reward him, preserve him. He wrote a book called Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery. It's a little short book. I suggest you look it up. Dr. Naeem Akbar, Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery. This is what the business of what Malcolm was about. Then the third was the external struggle, which is the outward struggle against racism and the foreign policy implications of racism, which is imperialism, right? And anything we see today going on overseas, as far as foreign policy, it's rooted in racism. And the original sin of America is anti-Black racism. That's the original sin of the United States of America. And really, we could say the false ideology of white supremacy. That's the original sin of America, which America hasn't made tell for yet. So we start off with another hadith sahih of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that people are minds, kind of like the minds of al-fidda wa dhahab. People are like mines, like gold mines and silver mines. The best of them pre-Islam, Jahiliyyah, are the best of them in al-Islam if they comprehend. If they comprehend. Now keep this in mind when we're talking about Malcolm. So let's first start with the first part. Or we know this as mujahada in the language of Tazkiyah, mujahada, or jihad al-nafsi wal-hawa, as it was mentioned in our Sirah books. The hadith has some problems, but this is in Sirah. This is after Ghazwa Tabuk, one of the last Ghazawat of the Sahaba. It is recorded in the Tafsir al-Baghawi mentions this as well as other Sirah books. So the Prophet ﷺ told the Sahaba, we are now leaving al-Jihad al-Asghar to al-Jihad al-Akbar. The lesser jihad to the greater jihad. Ya Rasulullah, mal Jihad al-Akbar. فقال صلى الله عليه وسلم الجهاد النفسي والهوى. What's the greater jihad? It's a jihad against the inward self and against caprice, against acting off of sinful lusts, desires. This is a greater jihad. And now this is the Fakir's conclusion I came to. I came to this conclusion, if I look at any one of the campaigns of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in a spiritual sense, Malcolm X or Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, his life mirrors, in a sense, Salman al-Farsi. Salman al-Farsi was born in now what's called modern-day Iran. Salman was born from a Zoroastrian family. And there's still Zoroastrians in the world. There's an area called Yazd. In Iran, there's still Zoroastrians. When he came across Christianity, he felt that Christianity was better than the Majusi religion. So he left Christianity, he left Zoroastrianism for Christianity. Then he heard about that one, El-Mukhtar, the promised one, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Salman was captured as a slave, by the way. He was free. He was a mawla, he was a client freed by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam under his protection. Then he perfected his faith and came to that which was better than the two, which deen indallahi Islam. And surely the deen, the religion with God, is al-Islam. Likewise, Malcolm was born into a Christian family. I told you about his father being a pastor. His mother was Christian, part of the UNIA movement. When he got incarcerated, he was introduced to the Nation of Islam by his brothers, mainly his brother named Filbert, another brother named Wilfred. Then he accepted the teachings of the Nation of Islam, which he found to be better than Christianity. Then when he came in contact with normative Islam or traditional Islam, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, he left the Nation of Islam and perfected faith for that which is better. So in a sense, he was spiritually wayfaring. And this is a sign of a man who's truthful. He was always in search of the truth. And what was one of the fada'il of Malcolm, or the virtues, we all need to learn from this. Even though he publicly proclaimed in a very strong way that he believed something, once he learned to be wrong or false, he not only admitted he was false, that he was wrong publicly about what he talked about publicly, he tried to work to undo that which he preached or talked about that was wrong. Right? This is the struggle of the ego, because it's very hard for the nufus many times to admit publicly, I'm wrong. I'm a sinner and a mudhnib. I was wrong. Malcolm, however, after being the Nation of Islam, going all around the country, saying that God came in the person of a Desi guy to Detroit in 1930 named Farad Muhammad, saying that white people are all shayateen, kulluhum. Every single white person is a devil by nature. Right? After saying these things that go clearly against Islam, right? There are heresies to say that God is a man. It's a heresy. Right? To say all white people are born devils, this is bid'ah i'tiqadiyya. This is a theological heresy. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitra." Every single child is born upon the pure primordial nature. Fitratullahi lati fatara nasa alayha. Allah says in the Quran, right? The nature that Allah created or originated the heavens and the earth and the creation, also He originated the human beings good upon this same nature. So we don't believe people are inherently better or worse because of phenotype. Or for that matter, we don't believe people are better than or worse because of gender. Right? Ya ayyuhan nasu inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila lita'arafu. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Right? This ayah is not just talking about racism. It starts off first talking about gender as well. O humankind, shall we create you from a single male and single female? Then we made you different nations and tribes that you may get to know one another, and show the most honorable of you with God are those who have the most taqwa, the most God consciousness. So it starts off talking about gender in the ayah, right? Not race, not ethnicity. So hence, Malcolm was a man of truth, and he struggled towards the truth, and he sought to reform his inward character to that which was true. And he was sincere. He was sincere in that. This was his personal struggle, his personal jihad. Especially when he became a wayward youth, Malcolm was a criminal. Malcolm used to use cocaine, smoke cannabis. He used to be a zani, right? He used to be a thief. He did robberies, right? He sold drugs. He used to arrange, they call it sex work these days. People would come into Harlem, you know, from the outward areas into Harlem to basically get African American sex workers, right? Malcolm, he was a pimp. I'm trying to scoot around the word, right? And he did his inward jihad, and he fought against his egos and his lust, and he reformed himself to be one of the best of the people. From one of the worst of the people to one of the best of the people. And by the way, we should also gain some spiritual strength from this, my brothers and sisters in general, especially on Ramadan. Never give up hope in God's mercy. No matter what sins we've committed, we can always make tawbah to Allah. Allah can forgive us, and we don't have to wallow in the states of despair that we are in, despairing over what sins or mistakes we commit. Allah says in the Quran, say to my servants, O Prophet, who have transgressed against their own souls, do not give up hope in God's mercy. Allah commands us not to give up hope in His mercy. This is an ayat that refers to Tawbah, right? So Malcolm X, in his sidq, in his truthfulness, he also was a man of Tawbah. May Allah make us be the people of repentance. Now, I spent a little bit more time on this. Malcolm's message of internal community forum We also know this hadith to be a well-authenticated hadith from Al-Habib al-Mustafa alayhi salatu wassalam, man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum. Very well-known hadith. Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum. Whoever imitates a people is of them. In Arabic, it's called tashabbuh. Tashabbuh. So, first, what Malcolm's discourse was, starting in the nation, but even as a Sunni, he says that many of the problems that plagued Black America was imitating the immorality of the dominant white culture. As a matter of fact, like I'll share something. It probably sounds a little racist, but I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, Chesterfield to be exact. It's like a semi-rural area outside of Richmond. Now it's a bigger suburban area. My grandfather lives in Williamsburg, Virginia. The one I said is 97. But my family comes from the South. So in these times, if we saw someone who was African American in a semi-rural area who was like acting what we consider to be a little too eccentric in their social habits, or using drugs like LSD, for instance, right? Or eating shrooms, we would say he's acting like white folks. I'm serious, that's what we say. It's not nice, it's not right. But I grew up hearing this, right? Because when you're in the South, especially at this time, Black Americans had to walk the straight and narrow. Why is that? Because my mom went to segregated schools, right? There's certain hospitals we couldn't go to. A Black man could get locked up for staying on a court too long for vagrancy laws. So like we had to be on extra special good conduct. People who could act wild or unrestricted weren't Black people or even like Mexicans or Latinos. It was only white people who could act that way in public spaces. Back when I was growing up, right? Even to the extent when I was growing up still, it couldn't be done. But definitely from my mom's generation, like in the 60s and my grandpa's generation. So when we saw someone acting this way, we would say, that's acting like white folks. Now, what Malcolm's critique is that many of the issues that were helping to disempower Black Americans in a sense was copying the immorality of Hollywood, copying the immorality and trying to copy certain exports of cultural production and certain things that were socially normative in the dominant society, that in the movement of trying to seek to be integrated into white America, that we were seeking a type of white acceptance by copying white standards of immorality. And even Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said this before he died. He said this to Andrew Young, the first Black ambassador to the United Nations under President Jimmy Carter. Dr. King said, I fear that I'm integrating my people into a burning house. Dr. King's famous for saying this at the end of his life. Dr. King actually was very radical at the end of his life, right? That's why he had to be killed, right? He went through his own evolution as well. As Dr. Cornel West says, we have to be careful about the Santa Clausification of Dr. King, right? He's some warm, fuzzy person that just walked about so Black folks could sit on the front of the bus and use the toilet next to white folks, and then everything is done. And Rosa Parks sat down, we got the right to ride the bus and to use toilets that everyone else uses, and we're good, right? That was Dr. King. That was his critique. So number one, Malcolm challenged Black Americans, and this was the general social conservative message of the Nation of Islam, is to let's clean ourselves up and not look to be saved by the dominant culture. And once we clean ourselves up, then God, Allah, will come to our aid. This was Malcolm's message. If you can go listen to some of his old lectures, they're all on YouTube. This was his message to Black people, right? And this was his same message as a Sunni, not just Nation of Islam. Hence, also proof of this, when he left the Nation of Islam, he started 2 organizations. He started Muslim Mosque Incorporated first, and then after that, he started the Organization of Afro-American Unity. He said, why? He says, because he said the Black people, which he said were Afro-Americans at that time, used that language, needed a spiritual base to ground ourselves, to clean ourselves up from copying the filth and immorality of the dominant society. So he established the masjid first, which the Mosque of Islamic Brotherhood that's in Harlem is the outgrowth of that, which Imam Talib Abdul Rashid, may Allah preserve him. I've spoken in that masjid before. That is literally the outgrowth of the masjid that Malcolm X started. And then Sheikh Tawfiq took that over, in which Malcolm X arranged his scholarship to Al-Azhar University, right? So he was one of the first African Americans to graduate from Al-Azhar in the 60s, long before the likes of my friend Imam Hamza Abdul Malik in Tennessee or other African Americans, Ustad Obeillah Evans, or like Dr. Sherman Abdul Hakim Jackson, who studied in Egypt. Long before then, it was Sheikh Tawfiq, who came from this spiritual movement of Muslim Mosque Incorporated, started by Malcolm X. Malcolm also sought to undo in Black folks. Now keep in mind, we're going to talk about this relating to Muslims too, because this is a problem that affects all people who were colonized, right? It affects South Asians. It affects Arabs, some more than others, depending on what lands. It seems to be that Yemeni people were the most fierce in fighting people trying to take them over. I think Yemenis are probably the least of the Arabs that had the colonized mindset. And to this day, Yemenis are the most Sha'bi, right? They're the most Arab of the Arabs. They are the most Arabs of the Arabs. Might help our brothers and sisters in here. So he tried to address what was discussed earlier. So when Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois talked about the double consciousness, and others now call it internalized racism, Malcolm was addressing this phenomenon. And this is the biggest form of slavery, or the biggest form of, we can say, being shackled, is that when a group of people who are colonized or oppressed begin to view themselves through the lens of their oppressor. Malcolm was seeking to undo that. Hence, I gave the khutbah this past Friday at a masjid. Majority of the congregants are Bangladeshis. So I was talking about this issue of race and racism, and I still hear these problems as people come to me. I'm like Sheikh Zawaj in our community. I'm the one people always coming to, trying to do weddings or try to find someone for their son or someone for their daughter. Back in Metro Detroit, I'm one of those people. You still have the phenomenon of mothers pushing Fair and Lovely skin bleach cream on their daughters, trying to make them more fair, thinking that's going to make them more marriageable. We still have this issue going this day where we have people skin bleaching. This is haram. La darara wa la darara fil Islam. Hadith sahih. Right? There's no harming yourself or reciprocating harm. This stuff has carcinogens. Like this stuff that causes cancer. Right? Outside of it, trying to change the khalq of Allah, trying to change the creation of Allah. This is haram. Right? MashaAllah, some of our mashayikh in West Africa actually gave fatwa saying that skin bleach cream is haram. Right? Literally, it's haram. All of our Muslim stores sell Fair and Lovely and other skin bleaching soaps. Right? This just is like a small example. So we take on European beauty standards of lighter skin supposedly being more beautiful. Or saying things like, oh, she looks good for a dark girl. This is part of the double consciousness, right? Internalized racism. Because we view certain people as better, more superior, more civilized, and sometimes even more beautiful. Based upon melanin content or lack thereof. Haram. So Malcolm X talked about this. You can go and look at this on a video. Who taught you to hate the color of your skin? Who taught you to hate the texture of your nose? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose? Who taught you to hate your skin to the extent that you bleach? He talked about this. Really, Malcolm, in the olden times, Black people used to see being called Black as a pejorative. It was Malcolm who helped start the discourse that then led to the Black Power movement as saying Black is beautiful, like with SNCC and the Southern, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Black Panther Party. They used to use Malcolm's picture. Malcolm was their icon after Malcolm was martyred. They're not even Muslims, right? But the whole thing about Black is beautiful, Black power, this was inspired by Malcolm destigmatizing Blackness on a national level. So he gets a share of that. He gets a share of that. And not just doing tashabbuh as far as cultural taste, but also to try to break us of cognitive frameworks that imprison us about certain things that just by living in society, we just simply take as being the so-called gospel truth, as if we don't even interrogate them. Why? Because they become dominant in society. He taught us to interrogate this. So for instance, he says something very simple as American democracy is hypocrisy. American democracy is hypocrisy. By the way, democracy is not a virtue according to Sharia. Justice is a virtue. The end goal of society and for government is justice, is not to have democracy where morality can be subjected to public opinion polls. Democracy in of itself is not a virtue. If democracy brings about relative justice in society, then the virtue is justice and democracy would just be the means. Democracy is not the ends. It's like so-called Muslim representation. Having a Muslim in office should not be just simply the goal. We have so-called elections in Muslim majority countries. Look how most of those countries are dysfunctional. Is that the goal? Justice is the goal. So Malcolm brought forth a type of discourse trying to do like a type of internal intellectual revolution. And again, this type of language that Malcolm helped popularize led to the shifting of speech within the civil rights movement. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that was led by the late Congressman John Lewis of Georgia. He basically was pushed out of leadership, and then a man by name of, well, he changed his name to Kwame Ture. His name was Stokely Carmichael, then became the president of SNCC. And then likewise, Huey P. Newton and Eldridge Cleaver, Kathleen Cleaver, the Black Panther Party, and Angela Davis, Professor Angela Davis, Dr. Angela Davis. They give her props. Who still teaches at University in California. They all give credit to Malcolm. Even, by the way, before I continue, people in America were being called Negroes. And he would use the term so-called Negro. Now, normally the term is used African American or Black American. It is Malcolm who helped, this is a good innovation, but Malcolm is the one who put forth the discourse and popularized the discourse in American society of calling us Afro-Americans, which then became African Americans. This was Malcolm was the one who started this language of Afro-American, African American. Okay, Malcolm's discourse on Black liberation. Okay, this is a very important point. It's going to be a little touchy. If I haven't said anything touchy, yes, it's going to be touchy. We know that the hadith is sahih, near Imam Bukhari. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Yadu ula, khairu min yadu sufla. Yadu ula, كلمة يد السفلى. The hand that's the upper hand is better than the hand that's like this. And he explained what this meant. The hand that spins, or the hand that gives, is better than the hand that begs. The hand that gives is superior than the hand that begs, that has their hand out, asking for someone to do something for them that they could do for themselves. So in a speech you can listen to, I suggest you listen to this maybe tomorrow, called The Message to the Grassroots. If you listen to it again. When I was in high school, I had the 12-inch vinyl. If any of you remember record players, I had this speech. Has Message to the Grassroots on one side and the Ballot of the Bullet on the other side. These are two speeches Malcolm gave as a Sunni, who's out of the Nation of Islam at this time. And he talked about the issue of house Negro versus the field Negro. Are you all familiar with this term, right? I don't have to go and define this term, do I? About the house Negro and the field Negro. It goes back to chattel slavery in the South. So he gave a critique about the Black bourgeoisie and organizations in the Black community that were predominantly funded by outside the Black community, that were getting foundation money and other funds by white philanthropic donors. And I came up with this phrase of work, and I've been in this work for about almost 20 years. I came up with this saying, who funds you runs you. So if a Black organization, like Black Lives Matter, for instance, was started by non-Black money. This is an example, Black Lives Matter. Started by zero Black money, getting all this money from foundations, from outside the Black community, then that means that that organization is serving the goal, the strategic goal, or the chess game of the foundation that is funding them. And that's not necessarily the goal of the field Negroes or the grassroots, right? I wrote some things about BLM too. All of what I said about them when people thought Black Lives Matter as a mantra was good. The 501c3 itself and its aims, I knew after investigating it when it first started growing up and getting this money, and I was in a strategic meeting years ago, about 7 or 8 years ago, I knew it was corrupt. That's why I told people in the community after George Floyd was lynched, I said, don't jump over your African-American Muslim brothers and sisters to go to Black Lives Matter. I said, maybe there's a reason why none of the Black massages have Black Lives Matter flags and encourage it. Maybe you should ask us, as your Muslim brothers and sisters said, jumping over us, thinking that you're going to help our cause. You may be being moved in someone else's chess game. Likewise, Malcolm critiqued the March on Washington. He called it the farce on Washington. The original aim of the March on Washington is that Black people were sick of what's going on in America. After a church in Birmingham, Alabama was bombed. As a matter of fact, bombings of Black homes and Black churches were so common that Birmingham was called Bombingham. Okay? After the bombing of a church in Birmingham, Alabama, which killed some Black girls, little Black girls. My national outcry, and a number of African Americans say the means of these civil rights groups is not working, not protecting us. Black men started picking up rifles and patrolling their own neighborhoods after that. None of this nonviolent turn the other cheek because the police weren't going to protect. And many times the police were part of the Klan themselves. And there's still police that are part of the Klan. And this is not a conspiracy theory. The Department of Homeland Security had a report years ago saying that law enforcement has been infiltrated by white supremacists and white nationalists. So there's as Reverend Al Sharpton says, many of them just took off their white sheets and put on black robes. Some of them are judges too. We can't be naive, right? So he critiqued that Black people were planning on shutting down Washington, D.C. There was no march, to the extent that Black people were planning on going to what is now Reagan National Airport, Washington Airport. Black people were talking about going en masse and shutting the city down and laying down on the runway to stop airplanes from landing or allowing airplanes to land on them. So the Kennedy administration then invited some of the big Black leaders, and they had a hotel, they had a meeting at the Carlisle Hotel, which is owned by the Kennedy family. So we talk about Trump owning Trump Plaza in DC. Well, the Kennedy family did the same thing and owned a hotel in DC and would invite people, and there'd be diplomats and other people doing it too. It's not just, it didn't start with Trump doing this type of stuff. This is old stuff. And said, oh, we're gonna advocate and endorse what's going on in DC, but we're gonna turn it into a march. And then appointed them to be the leaders of it and gave them money, in which now, adjusted to inflation, I did the calculations on this. The money that they gave these Black leaders for what Malcolm called the First on Washington was $15,300,000 to engineer that, which took away the original militancy of the march and changed the whole message, because the masses of Black people weren't talking about singing "We Shall Overcome." That was engineered or diverted. By the way, I appreciate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. very much, by the way. I'm just giving you Malcolm's critique, right? But it's something we have to be wary of and listen to this. But who funds you runs you. So he was telling Black people, and then later as Muslims in general, that it's beneath our izzah as a group of people to expect other people to do for us what we should do for ourselves. And we should be organizing to fund our own projects. How Malcolm was able to be so courageous, and how the nation was at that time. Even if he left the nation, they were not getting funded by outside people. They were being funded by Black people and by business ventures they start in their own community. They had independence. When you're independent, then you won't muzzle yourself. You can speak the truth and advocate for what you have to advocate upon. But if someone's giving you money to take certain positions, you either will do what they will tell you to do, or you will self-silence yourself out of fear of losing the money. There's also a tradition that says that a gift leads you into chains. Tabari mentions this. A gift or freely accepting money will lead you into shackles. So Malcolm had a critique about this with the civil rights movement, right? Q&A at the end, because I'm going to give you a contemporary example of how this relates to Muslims at the very end. It's something I experienced myself years ago with an issue. Malcolm's connection, and we'll conclude after, we'll conclude shortly for Q&A. I've been talking for a little while. So Malcolm is what some academics, they would call him a Black internationalist. And there is a history of Black internationalists, right? I mentioned Marcus Garvey. He was a Black internationalist. The poet / intellectual Maya Angelou, a Black internationalist, right? Black internationalist. Malcolm was a Black internationalist. He connected the dots between anti-Black racism here and imperialism abroad, because he understood that the same spiritual disease and the same mentality that affected this domestic issue also influenced American foreign policy. You can't disconnect one from the other. Even what's going on in Palestine right now. Allahumma su ikhwana fi Palestine. That policy, right, We talk about, we call that neo-settler colonialism. How was America started? Who used to live here? Who was brought here against their will and worked this land to build this land up to make it a superpower? By the way, Wall Street's history, enslaved Africans, black people used to be sold on Wall Street. Now they trade stocks. Enslavement just wasn't in the South below the Mason-Dixon line. So there's dots to connect, historical dots. Malcolm said, out of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. So if we want to understand what's going on there now in contemporary American policy, we have to go way back to when before this place was the United States of America. We have to go back to Jamestown, literally, right? So Malcolm gave a scathing critique of racism inside America. A scathing critique. As a matter of fact, he gave a critique that at the time was startling, and not just to white Americans, even African Americans were even scared of the way he was talking. A number of African Americans were scared of the way he was talking. I encourage you, there's a PBS documentary, you can watch it online. It's called Make It Plain. It's about the life of Malcolm X. You will even see Sonia Sanders, one of the great African American poets. She even talked about the first time she heard Malcolm at a street rally in Harlem. What he said scared her. Right? The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam told Abu Dhar al-Ghifari al-An, "Qul al-haqq in kana murran." Speak the truth even if it's bitter. This was Malcolm. Malcolm was following the Sunnah. He wasn't lying. He used to say things, and sometimes the truth can be bitter. So talking about the history of this land, the true history of this land, right? Like we talk about the founding fathers, right? Thomas Jefferson, he's one of the founding fathers, right? He penned the Declaration of Independence that John Hancock had the biggest signature on. I grew up in Virginia, so we had to memorize this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, right? This guy owned his own children as slaves and didn't even free them while he was alive. He owned his own children because he owned black people, and he had children by a woman by the name of Sally Hemings. He didn't free his own children. How can you have your own children as slaves? This was common practice, including George Washington. He owned at least 3 Muslims as slaves who were black. Sambul, which is a Mandinka name, Mandinka tribe, Kulahum, all of them are Muslimin. To this day, almost every Mandinka is Muslim, like in the Gambia, Senegal, and these areas. Kunta Kinte, you're seeing roots. He had another woman by the name of, is spelled Fatima, which is Fatima, and then little Fatima, Fatima as-Sughra. Fatima as-Sughra. George Washington. Right? Who's on our money. So he uncovered a lot of things in this issue of trying to challenge the false ideology of white supremacy. Why I say it's the false ideology of white supremacy, I don't use the term white supremacy. Who actually enlightened me on this was, I don't know if you know her. She's a family friend, Ustada Aisha Prime. I don't know if any of you all know her or not. Ustada Aisha Prime. She was giving a talk and she said, the false ideology of white supremacy. He said, because whites aren't supreme. He said, keep on repeating this language. It's almost as if we are reinforcing it. He says the false ideology of white supremacy, because whites aren't supreme. إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم لا فضل العربيين على العجمي ولا العجميين على العربي ولا الأسود على الأحمر ولا الأحمر على الأسود إلا بالتقوى. Right? And the black is not better than the white, nor is the white superior to the black. Right? In the farewell sermon, he said this. Malcolm X in challenging the false ideology of white supremacy, he's the first person in American history to lead up and organize a lawsuit challenging police brutality against a black man, actually got a monetary payout, a monetary settlement. This is something that, like, we talk about Ben Crumb or Johnny Cochran. Although Malcolm was an attorney, there's a famous story that's also is dramatized in the movie X. A Nation of Islam member who was beat up and drugged to the police station in Harlem. And Malcolm, who was the head of Mosque number 7, marched all of the men down in order and stood in front of there. He went to the police station and got that man sent to the hospital. He was locked up with his head cracked open. He suffered brain damage. And there was a multi-million-dollar lawsuit filed against the NYPD. And it ended up being successful. This is the first one that we know of in American history. It was a better kind of Malcolm. And of course, the famous beating of Mr. Hinton in the Nation of Islam mosque in Los Angeles, California. And you can see his speech online in regards to that. In regards to challenging this issue of police brutality. Malcolm X, we saw what the people did in South Africa recently, taking that particular entity to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, right? And we all saw that, right, in Geneva. The first one that talked about doing the Sabbath of that is Malcolm. Malcolm publicly talked about, and he went and spoke with leaders of freely independent countries in Africa, and he had a plan on taking the United States of America in front of the UN and the ICC, just as South Africa just took Israel to court, saying that the United States of America was violating the human rights of African Americans. And this is the distinction that Malcolm made. We shouldn't call Malcolm X a civil rights leader. He's a human rights leader. What's the distinction? Civil rights are given by a nation state, and only full civil rights go to citizens of that state. For instance, it's part of a civil right to vote. If you're not a citizen, if you're here on a green card, you can't vote. The Second Amendment, you can't own a handgun or a rifle to hunt unless you are a citizen. Being here as like a student visa or green card, you can't own a handgun. The full breadth of rights of the Constitution are extended to citizens inside that nation state border. Human rights transcend space and time. Human rights are universal. And we as Muslims believe that human rights are given by Allah. Huquq al-insan comes from al-haq subhanahu wa ta'ala. Human rights come from the one who bestows rights. And he is the one who is owed the greatest right, Allah, and that is to be worshipped alone. So there's only really two types of rights. There's huquq al-Rahman wa huquq al-Ibad al-Rahman. There's the rights that we owe God, the most merciful, and the rights that we owe his servants, the servants of the most merciful. Those are the two primary rights. Then we also owe rights to creation, to the rest of creation, like animals and things like that. So Malcolm X brought this to take America to the International Criminal Court, but he took America in front of the global court of public opinion. You have to keep in mind, there were two predominant world powers at the time. There were two superpowers. The Soviet Union, which disintegrated, based in Russia, Moscow, right? Putin used to be a KGB officer and part of the old Soviet Union before it disintegrated in 88 or 89 or something, one of those times. And then the US helped lead up the so-called Allied powers, the West, America and the Western European countries. Then you had the rest that fell underneath the Soviet bloc, communists and socialists. countries. Okay, so tying this into imperialism abroad, Malcolm is the first person in general Black discourse to talk about the Bandung Conference of 1954. Bandung was a conference that took place in Indonesia. And it was countries that were fighting in the East from getting out of neo-colonialism, countries seeking to get their independence from the Dutch and the French and the Portuguese and the British, met in Bandung. And all of these countries that met were all countries of non-white people except for one, Yugoslavia, in which we know that of the former Yugoslavia, Bosnia was a part of that, right? Which is majority Muslim, and also Kosovo. They met at the Bandung Conference of talking about trying to set up a bloc of countries to cooperate outside of being under the influence of the East, the Soviet Union bloc, and the West, the American bloc. So Malcolm X had a vision and talked about this. He said that all these countries had one thing in common. They all were colonialized by who? Europeans. That's the one common trait that all of them had. So he was looking at things about a common geopolitical adversary. Two big white ran powers that sought to control the natural resources and the people of the rest of what we now call the global South. We call it the global South. I don't use this term developing world or third world. These terms weren't coined by us. Third world was coined by racists, right? The split. And then you never heard of a second world. You have the first world and your third world. Where's the second world? You can't even you can't get to the first world. It's crazy. Malcolm X, he was seen as an ambassador for African people in the diaspora. There was an organization that started called the Organization of African Unity. In 1964, they held their conference in Cairo when Gamal Abdel Nasser was the president of Egypt. It was the heads of states of countries that just gotten free from colonialism. So Jomo Kenyatta of Kenya, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. You have all these countries in Africa, Gamal Abdel Nasser, all these countries in Africa that were free from colonialism, except for Zimbabwe, which was called at the time Rhodesia, because they were under apartheid rule, and South Africa was under apartheid rule at that time, were there at this meeting. The only person who was given a seat at the table with presidents of all these countries was Malcolm X. Malcolm X was seen as a de facto ambassador of Black people in the West, and he was allowed to speak. So he was sitting there with all of the world of the leaders of other countries and talking to them about the need for cooperation and the intersection between anti-Black racism and colonialism of their lands. This is Malcolm. Hence probably why at this time, Malcolm X was the most surveilled man in America. He was more surveilled than Dr. King, because he just wasn't being surveilled by the FBI. He was also being followed by the CIA. And if you read things that have been declassified, he was being followed even when he made Hajj. He was being followed and talked about how he was being followed in Cairo. Malcolm was poisoned in Cairo. He almost achieved martyrdom in Cairo. He was poisoned. He was poisoned in Cairo. This is when he contacted and told his family and close friends that he didn't think it was simply the Nation of Islam that was trying to sabotage him or kill him, because he knew the Nation of Islam didn't have reach to be following him in Cairo. It wasn't the Nation of Islam doing that. And he also, the same year, got blocked entry into France. He basically got put like on a barred list and no entry list. He was going to speak to a group of Algerian students in France. He got blocked. And you know, we know about the Algerian Revolution and the struggle of our Algerian brothers and sisters against the French. Were the most brutal in Algeria. They were brutal, savages. Now let's go to Palestine in Gaza. During this time, Malcolm visited Gaza for 2 days. Actually, he spent time in the refugee camp Khan Yunis that we hear about in the news being bombed. Malcolm spent 2 days there. This picture you see there is him meeting with officials of the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, which now is known as the Palestinian Authority, Fatah, right? The PLO. And Malcolm, after coming back, and you can read the entire piece online, there was a publication in Egypt at the time, you know, because the British occupied Egypt for a while. So, you know, there were people there who spoke English, but he wrote something that was printed in the paper. And you can look this up in the date to read the entire piece. I read this so that the people online can see the words, but you all can see it. Malcolm said after leaving Gaza in Palestine, did the Zionists have the legal or moral right to invade Arab Palestine, uproot its Arab citizens from their homes, and seize all Arab property for themselves, just based on a quote-unquote religious claim that their forefathers lived there thousands of years ago? Only 1,000 years ago, the Moors lived in Spain. Now, the Moors were Muslims. Only 1,000 years ago, the Muslims lived in Spain. Would this give the Muslims of today the legal and moral right to invade the Iberian Peninsula, drive out its Spanish citizens, and then set up a new Moroccan nation where Spain used to be, as the European Zionists have done to our Arab brothers and sisters in Palestine? In short, the Zionist argument to justify Israel's present occupation of Arab Palestine has no intelligent or legal basis in history, not even in their own religion. Where is their Messiah? By the way, those people that dug those tunnels in Brooklyn and Crown Heights not long ago, they were digging their tunnel. They're looking for some rabbi, I forgot his name, but they claim he's the Messiah. Brooklyn. By the way, a majority, you know, Biden's executive order about putting sanctions on the settlers in the West Bank, you heard of it. That means nothing. It's hogwash. About 75% of the illegal settlers are actually American citizens. So American citizens are exempt from it. Most of those people from Brooklyn. Those are New Yorkers and people from New Jersey. A lot of those people in Miami. They're living in those. They shouldn't even be called settlements. They're outposts. That's the proper term. These are illegal outposts. So Malcolm spoke about what's going on. He tied the dots in regards to seeing Israel is no different than what took place, or excuse me, seeing what happened in Palestine, no differently than what took place in other countries in the global south and in Africa in particular, as far as a type of neo-colonial project. This was Malcolm's critique of that. And he also critiqued, in other speeches about how people who were Zionists in that community would take wealth out of the Black community in places like Harlem, running tenements and running shops, and taking that money out towards helping fund settlements on occupied territory. Malcolm critiqued this too, starting in the nation, but he said this as a Sunni. But he started critiquing this in the nation. Now, in conclusion, 4 lessons before I conclude. 4 lessons that I think we can learn from Malcolm's Evolution of Revolution. I've already said these things, that kind of drilling down on it. Inshallah, we will have Q&A. So number 1, change comes from within. It's inside our individual selves and in our community. We know the ayah Quran very well. Surely God shall not change the condition of the people until they change what's inside themselves. The Mufassirin say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the believers a ni'mah, a favor. And through disobedience, that ni'mah gets lifted. And once that favor gets lifted, divine aid does not come back to those people until they repent and come back to the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and following his messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Qul in kuntum tuhibbun Allah fattabi'uni yuhibbukum Allah wa yaghfir lakum dhunubakum wallahu ghafurur rahim. Say to the people, O prophet, if you love God, then follow me. Then God will love you and forgive you of your sins. Sayyidina Ali, Karamallah Wajhu, and one of the dua that he has, you can see the whole dua in Kitab al-Dua, the chapter called Dua, and Musnad ibn Abi Shayba. He asked for dua. He's asking for forgiveness. It's long dua. And he's listing things that we need forgiveness from. And one is, Oh Allah, please forgive me of sin that causes calamity to descend. So as much as we need organizing on the outside and activism, the first work is hard work for ourselves. As Dr. Sharma Abdul Hakim Jackson said, Hafidullah Ta'ala, hard work is the hard work. It's so easy to point the fingers at other people and how the wrong they're doing. What about us? I said in my clip this past Friday, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, do you enjoin piety and justice for people, but you forget it for yourselves, yet you recite the book? Do you not have intelligence? So let's think about that, how we operate in the community. Because it's real easy to critique white supremacy or Zionism. It's hard to critique intra-Muslim racism. Anti-Black racism is inside the Muslim community. That's a thing that sometimes we're not honest about. Right? But we have to always work on trying to improve and clean our own act up. The asbab in themselves will not liberate Palestine, my brothers and sisters. Asbab alone, meaning material means, alone will not liberate Palestine. It's the Lord of the means who will liberate Palestine, not physical means alone. This is actually an Aqidah point. This is not a fiqh point. The Lord of the means. Allah is the real doer. He's the real determinant of outcomes. Inna Allah ala kulli shay'in qadir. We read this like in our books of Aqidah, like commentaries on Imam Tahawi's Aqidah. Right? We have to come back to Islam. Right? We have to come back to Islam. But marching and these things and working for legislation, those things are needed, but they're not sufficient. Number 2, American Muslims need to redefine the difference between allies and coalition partners in order to stop being used in others' political chess games. Malcolm talked about the wolf versus the fox. He compared the liberals as wolves. Excuse me. He compared the conservatives to wolves and the foxes as liberals. Conservatives, wolves. You know, a wolf howls a lot, makes a lot of noise. Like 45, he howled a whole lot while he was in the White House, didn't he? He's still howling right now on the campaign trail in South Carolina. He's howling. Then you have 46. Who half time doesn't know where he's at. You have the conservative wolf and the liberal fox. But Malcolm said that the fox is more likely to get the lamb chop. Or Malcolm said, if you have a chicken coop, and you're guarding your chicken coop, see, wolves and foxes both eat chickens. He said the wolf howls. The fox is sly, even he shows his teeth like he's smiling. He said, but when the wolf howls, you're more likely to be able to go to defend your chicken coop. The fox is quiet and sly. If you're not careful, you wake up in the morning, you see all of your hens are eaten. The fox devoured them. Right? So my point, my brothers and sisters, Malcolm gave this critique 60 years ago that I believe is true, that it's never in our interest to over align ourselves with any political dispensation or party in this country. And especially taking their money. Who funds you, runs you, which is the next slide right there. Who funds you, runs you. We need a little independent economic and communal independence through our institutions. So that when we have Muslims that are running for office, get to office, they're not overly reliant on other people's money. Because who funds you, runs you. It's influence, right? And this is real. Shout out to State Rep Munira sitting back there. MashaAllah. So it's the wolf versus the fox. By the way, from a Quranic perspective, the word awliya has two meanings. One can mean like almost like friends of God or saints. And the other aspect means allies. Allah inna awliya Allahi la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. This is the first meaning. And surely the awliya of God, no fears upon them, nor should they grieve. The first meaning. The second meaning, believing men and believing women are allies of one another. The guy to his backs. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and do not take others, the people of the book, as awliya over believers. They are awliya of one another. Why? Because in the true sense, wilaya is what you hold to be sacred. Someone who doesn't believe in the Quran, someone who doesn't believe in the uswa of al-Habib sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, will always have moral diversion with people who truly believe in that. And really, if a Christian is true to her faith, they're trying to convert you to become Christian. And I don't blame them for that. May Allah guide America to Islam. I pray for them. I'm not like, I believe it's good for their life in this life and for their salvation hereafter. Like, there's nothing in the Quran that calls us to be theological relativists or perennialists. No. Mm-mm. And then lastly, I would say this, and these are for people here who are not African American. Like, we want to be authentic, right? We start off talking about sidq, and quoting the ayah of Quran, it talked about, and from the believers are men who are true to the covenant they took with Allah. Right? So when we talk about Black suffering connected to us overseas, we have to start with clean intentions, right? And be authentic in working towards these relationships and working on these issues right here amongst starting within our own community, right? In other words, we have to be careful not try to instrumentalize Black suffering for an objective or political goal overseas. Be very careful about that. And actually, African Americans sometimes can sniff that out a mile away, and it's offensive. And I'll close with this example. I have a friend of mine who's Palestinian. He lives in Chicagoland area. He runs an organization called Iman, Dr. Rami Nashashibi. He's a mashallah. So one of these Ramadans when Gaza was being bombed, because they would normally bomb every year or every other year during Ramadans. Like, they have to assault the Muslims in Ramadan in Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, right, in the Masjid Ibrahimi, every Ramadan, and then every other year they bomb Gaza, almost like clockwork. It was one of these years, maybe 2012 or something. And actually, it was around the same time as Ferguson, when Mike Brown was killed by the police, around that time. And 8 years ago, 10 years ago. And so I told him this, so we were talking about, going to some people in the community and talking to them about, what's going on in Palestine, you want to come to this rally, and, this thing's going on, and they're bombing Palestine. He said, Palestinians. And then one of the guys stopped and said, oh, you mean, and he used an expletive. He said, oh, you mean those such and such people that own the liquor stores in our community, that sell us this stuff, that harass our girls? He's like, heck, he used that word, but heck no, we ain't going out into that rally. Because unfortunately, in many urban areas, they view people who own the mahal, the bodega, the liquor store, unfortunately, a lot of them are Palestinians. So they're like, and some are Yemenis too, right? But they're like, no, we won't have anything to do with that. So unfortunately, with a lot of Black America, I'm talking about on college campuses, but like in poor inner city areas like Southside Chicago, or in Cleveland, or in Brownsville, in Brooklyn, the only interaction they have with Palestinians is transactional, and many times it's behind bulletproof glass. To the extent that one of the brothers said that he viewed these people as the new Yahud of the Black community, because all these stores, the mahal in these stores that used to be owned by the Black community that Malcolm X talked about in the 60s, used to be owned by Jewish people. Now they're owned by our. I'm just keeping it 100 with you. This is what people will say in my community that maybe wouldn't tell you out of politeness, right? And of course, these aren't Muslims who are saying this, by the way. These are my African American brothers and sisters who still are on Christianity, or they're Hebrew Israelites or Rastafarians, right? These are the ones saying this. But the reality of it is that we have to work on being true. And if we're going to talk about this issue of racism, it just can't be an issue relating to foreign policy or stuff overseas, or things that affect Adams and Daisies. We have to take it beyond that, my brothers and sisters. With that, I conclude. I'm sorry, if I say anything that was overly, I didn't mean to offend anybody, but like Malcolm said, make it plain. So I had to be very direct with you. I drove all the way from Detroit to come here, so I didn't come here to beat around the bush and tap dance. Anyway, inshallah. With that, I will open up for any Q&A. I think we have time, inshallah.
Thank you.
Any questions? We can have some polite pushback for your needy brother.
Speak a little bit about the march in Washington. She said that was Dr. King, was he taking money, you invent, or was he being funded somebody with some other ulterior motives? I didn't understand that aspect. Yeah, so Dr. King's movement, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, a lot of the funding they were getting were from white, like philanthropic organizations and foundations, including when he had the meeting at the Carlyle Group, and there was this United Civil Rights Organization that was set up that was funneling money through certain organizations. His was one, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the National Urban League, the NAACP, the Congress of Racial Equality, known as CAIR, right? There were certain organizations that were being
that were being funded. And there's a certain, these are like the who's who of the civil rights movement. James Farmer, A. Philip Randolph, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Like these are
You're
very.
saying he knew what their negative intentions were, and he still continued to take funding from them?
No, I'm not saying he knew their intentions, but what I'm saying is that he was used. He was used. And when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. started talking against the Vietnam War, his funding dried up because those people were the establishment. Why SNCC was closed down, the SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, after the '67 war, they started talking about Zionism is racism and started talking about it. SNCC got its funding cut, and that closed the organization down. Right? Notice Dr. King's organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, is not even in the ballpark, not in the field. It doesn't even exist in any meaningful way. It's not even around, right? SNCC got closed down. Why? Who funds you runs you. And if you don't tote the party line of the agenda of these foundations, you should get closed down. And this is part of the problem, I believe, we have in the community. I'm not going to mention any names of any organizations. We have some organizations in our community get over 90% to 100% of their over 90% to 100% of their money from foundations and political action committees. So how can they be independent and speak on behalf of the Muslim community? In fact, they're really arms the Democratic Party in our community, masquerading as a voice, and they're organizing, but they're organizing around a so-called progressive agenda of the Democratic Party. Again, it's not, and I'm not saying we should not support candidates a part of that party, but we should be about interest. But we also need to know when we're being played and used, right? And alhamdulillah, our community is starting to wake up. Unfortunately, this genocide that's taking place is waking a lot of people up, right? But because these people come and make a whole bunch of promises, we say we have to have a seat at the table. What they say, if you're not at the table, if you don't sit at the table, you're on the menu. Malcolm X addressed that false narrative over 60 years ago. He said, just because you're at the table doesn't make you a diner. So we sit at the table and we don't get to eat what we want. We put in the order, we don't get to eat. So they say, oh, well, we have to have a seat at the table because when we really need these people, we'll be able to cash in the favor of the votes and the money we gave them. Okay, we went to these people. Okay, call for a ceasefire. Vote against sending arms to Israel. So, sit at the table, but not a diner. Right? So we've learned the hard way. Right? So, but again, the Prophet told us this. We shouldn't have our hands out begging these people for money to help fund our organizations. Who funds you runs you. I can't say this enough. And if you see an activist in our community or an organization, follow the money. The stuff's on 1090 forms, right? Of like where are they getting their money from? Follow their money. CAIR is a grassroots organization. The majority, I know CAIR-Michigan, we get all of our money from our grassroots, right? Maybe we don't have as big as offices, such and such office outside of CAIR or somewhere else, another organization, but we have our integrity. It's the common, right? We have our integrity, right? So we have to be careful about that we're not being played like a piano, right? But just keep that in mind. We have, and also, if you really want to do a deep dive, this is done by design of political engineering of our community. If you read the RAND report, came out in 2006 about how they recommended remaking the Muslim community from within, you'll see exactly the playbook. But mashallah, they fulfill it to a T in our community. And that's why we've seen some strange things where people advocate completely about things that are from the munkarat, completely forbidden and haram. And we'll see some Muslims organized in politics who will actively not just vote, but even will promote and march in favor of munkarat. That's a problem. Allah knows best. Your hand over there, yes, brother.
You talked about the D stands for Santa Clausification of, Dr. King in his quotes. We have a lot of that in our community, something I realize. There's calls to actions that are ignored because it's inconvenient to what's happening in your life. How do you prevent that from happening and make sure people are taking calls to action?
Okay, so number one, every day, including in these political things, we have to renew our intention every day. That what we are doing is not the sake for a political goal. Our ultimate goal is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a dua of Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Ilahi inni uriduk. My God, surely I desire you. Another one of the awliya said, Ilahi anta maqsudi wa ridaka matlubi. My God, you are my objective and your happiness is my desire. This is number one. Number two, we always pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and make the dua that is masnoon. Oh Allah, have me see truth as truth, have me see haqq as haqq and follow it. And have me see batil as batil and stay away from it. Right? We have to start from a spiritual perspective, even in regards to politics, right? It's all interconnected, right? Number three, we have to do our own individual due diligence on issues, right? We all have to take the onus and responsibility of actually doing our own research on information, which also includes going to those who know. Ask the people who know if you don't know. And we're told this in the Quran, right? And then I would say the other point is that our default as Muslims, according to the sacred law, when we are confused, the baseline is sukut, is not to move and stay quiet, not to take a position, which is really hard for some people these days, especially in the days of social media and or anti-social media. And everyone wants to do things right away, right? The baseline is to stay silent. And to go even further, with wara, the Prophet ﷺ said in hadith as Hassan, leave what makes you doubt, what does not make you doubt. If you have doubt about something, stay away from it. But if there's something that's confusing, the baseline is sukut. Stay silent, don't take a position until you're clear. Because you might find out that something you were told that was one way, the haqiqah is totally different. One of my teachers taught me this about, he gave two examples for any of you who are involved in like human anatomy or even like science. He says that when you look at someone's skin, what you see is really what you don't see on two accounts. Number one, the top layer of skin that you see or what you are seeing that you think is alive is actually dead. Number one. Number two, when we see colors, haqiqatan, we are actually seeing all the colors in the spectrum, except for that color that we see, we actually are seeing the absence of that color. So you see someone that is very, very black, you're actually seeing the absence of blackness. When you see someone that's pale skin or white, you're actually seeing the absence of whiteness. Meaning that what we think that we see on the surface really isn't the reality of things many times. This is what he taught me. Right? Just as a tree, in the Quran talks about a good tree, as the tree is growing up, simultaneously at the same time the roots are growing down deeper into the ground, but we don't see the growth going down, we only see the growth going up. The growth going down is the haqiqah. Right? That's the reality. So this is my advice. And I try to follow this myself. But many times when people come to me about something that's novel or new or a certain thing, I tell them quickly. Imam Malik, Imam Dar al-Hijra, rahmatullahi alayhi, he said the kalima la adri nisful ilm. Always remember that. La adri nisful ilm. Saying I don't know is half of knowledge. It's okay to say I don't know. And then a person of real knowledge, normally when they end their talk or give an opinion, they are always in wallahu a'lam. And Allah knows best. That's my long advice for you. Allah knows best. Yes, brother.
So, like you mentioned how like Malcolm, he didn't just come out of like a random vacuum. Like his parents were part of an organization that tried to like uplift the community. And you also mentioned that like one of the reasons why he was able to speak the truth was because of like his funding was independent, just like the nation. So based on your study of his life, what do you think? What do you think gave him the ability to like speak the truth when so many others were not?
Okay. Number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifted him with a saja'ah. He gifted him with the spiritual trait of courage. And by the way, courage is not something that can be fake. True courage is a spiritual quality. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he sought refuge from el-jubn, which means cowardice. Which means cowardice is a demerit. So we have sins of action, but we also have sins of the heart. So many times we don't think about that. We think that sins are only sins of actions and speech. No, there's also sinful states or ahwal. They are sinful, right? And courage is in the wasat, as Imam Ghazali mentioned. So when we think of virtue, when we're talking about Malcolm, he had the courage of, he had the virtue of courage. To the right, or the extreme, is being reckless. The extreme to the left is cowardice. So Malcolm had courage, which means that he had tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something that can't be faked. Tawakkul is something that comes about through remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, dhikr, remembrance of Allah, also knowing one's own state, muhasabah, reflecting on one's own state and one's neediness towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And if one understands their own true state with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they realize that Allah is al-Ghani, but he's also all-powerful, which means that these people who appear to look all-powerful really aren't. God is in control. He's in charge, right? So also, Malcolm, subhanAllah, Malcolm was gifted with the thirst and the quest, as I mentioned, of seeking knowledge. Talibul ilm faridatun ala kulli muslim wa muslima. See, the Prophet ﷺ said, seeking knowledge is a religious obligation. Every Muslim man, every Muslim woman. He wasn't satisfied in just knowing what he thought he knew. And in this, he read books, but he also asked. He also inquired. And that's how he came to the Sunnah, by the way. It just wasn't him reading books on his own. He went to Mashayikh, went to people of learning, and asked questions over time. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided him and lifted up his maqam. Right? He lifted his spiritual station. Right? So, I mean, but look, a lot of this, as I mentioned, I keep on saying this, the way that he was able to speak and carry himself with such confidence, it was the inside manifesting to the outside. It was the spiritual state that manifested to his words and his actions, right? And also, let me tell you this, and I believe, as Dr. Omar said, that Malcolm was a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I believe that Allah blessed him and gave him something special. And I will, maybe we'll take one more question because we're running over. I heard this, we'll get you next. I heard this from Benjamin Kareem, myself, with my own ears. Benjamin Kareem was the man who used to introduce Malcolm before his speeches when Malcolm left the nation. okay, he would basically talk for a couple minutes and bring him to the stage. Normally, Brother Benjamin Kareem would sit in a chair next to Malcolm, but he would serve as basically the last form of protection if someone tried to rush the stage to harm him. He would sit there. That day backstage, Benjamin Kareem said, Malcolm said, the day don't sit next to me, the day he was martyred. February 21st, 1965. Benjamin said, Brother Malcolm, if I was next to you, who's going to protect you? He said that Malcolm gave him a big hug and started to sob and looked in his eyes and said, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, none of you believes until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. Don't sit next to me today. And after Brother Benjamin Kareem introduced Malcolm and left the stage, within 90 seconds, he was on his way to martyrdom. What guided him to not let Benjamin Kareem sit there? I believe that he knew that day he was going to be honored with martyrdom. La khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. No fear should be upon them, nor should they grieve. This is my belief. Allah knows best. But Malcolm was a man. He was a Raja. And also in his eulogy, when Ozzie Davis gave his eulogy, he said, Malcolm, our manhood, our shining black manhood. Rujula, he was a Raja. He was a real man. One of my teachers said that there are many males who are not men. There are many dhukur that are not rijal. There are many males with beards and deep voices and muscles who aren't men. Malcolm was a man. Yes.
Yeah.
Comments.
Very powerful. Just a question on some of the political aspects of what you said. If I heard you correctly, I think you said we have to be cautious here about both of these parties. You know, one can be like the wolf and the other like the fox and so on. And we know even the source of funding each of these parties, you know, for the most part, oftentimes they're funded by the same source and sometimes by, you know, slightly different kind of agenda and so forth. So a Muslim is in a real quandary in this country in terms of their political sort of action. You know, how do they engage in that?
Yeah.
Do you have any further sort of thoughts on that in terms of how people should think about that?
Yeah, so look, we have not developed in our community, and think about it, the American Muslim community in many ways, we're still like at an infancy stage. Like we're really as a community, we're like toddlers. Like we've gotten up and just started to walk. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but really, I mean, not just institutionally in our thinking. Because other communities are strategizing 100 years in advance. How do they want their community and society to look 100 years from now? Like how will America look for their great grandchildren? That's how other people are thinking. You know, we can't even agree on moon. Okay, now this is my suggestion. What I've told people, and I've been trying to implement this in Michigan. But we need a group of people, because the answer just isn't with one type of people. It's not just with organizers and activists. Organizers and activists alone cannot set the political agenda for Muslims. We need religious scholars. We need medical professionals. We need people who have knowledge in political science and sociology, right? We need people who know about the environment, organizers and activists, and we all come together and we have consultation. However, I believe that there's a hierarchy of knowledge. And this is why there has to be scholars at the table, because truth is unified, but some knowledge takes precedence over others. So the Sharia, the sacred law, in its objectives, These are the guardrails. That is more important than the particulars. We need to know the particulars, but we also need to know a general framework. So we have, on the one side, we have certain objectives as Muslims for society. We have the protection of religion, to be able to practice religion, religious liberty, protection of life, right? The protection of intellect not to be clouded, like it's called hifzul aql, for the intellect not to be corrupted. Like, for instance, drugs and alcohol corrupt the mind, right? And also the protection of offspring, right? These are what our scholars say are the 5 objectives of the sacred law. And we also have other category under this about what is dururi, was absolute, like life or death, absolutes within these. We have haji, that which are strong needs that don't fit this actual like incumbent emergency need. And then we have tahsini, which is the 3rd level of that which helps beautify a life, but doesn't fall under a strong need nor something that's imminent. So we take different issues, starting local, state, national, international, based upon this framework. And then we can make not emotional votes, but something based upon an actual framework. And then this is where we had the specialists to tell us what's going on in healthcare, what's going on in the environment, what's going on in the criminal justice system. But the ulama have to be a part of it, right? So we have to have all of these different people coming together. So we have to know text and context. And I keep saying this, text and context. Right now, we don't have that. Right now, we have organizations basically and do political organizing, and they try to tell many times imams what we should do, this, that, or that. And then there are people who are going out. There is no consultation about who to vote for issues based in the sacred law. I've gone to every single major political organization, the major organizers, and I said, what is your metrics? It doesn't exist. So what we have to do is we have to build this out. Inshallah, maybe this is my next book that I write. I wrote one book called Towards Sacred Activism. I'm thinking about writing a book about this issue because I've consulted with my teachers about this, but we need at least some sort of roadmap. And obviously anything I write can be critiqued, but right now we don't have a metrics based upon the sacred law and the akhlaqiyat, like Islamic ethics. Most of how we vote is based upon feelings. Oh, Trump is so big and bad, he's so scary, so then we have to vote against him. For instance, by the way, I'm no fan of 45. I shouldn't even mention his name. I'm not a fan of 45, by the way. I'm just saying, this can't be driven up. It's kind of like this whole thing, well, he's bad, but he's lesser of 2 evils. Sometimes we are making the argument, in reality, oh, I don't like Shaitan, so vote for Dajjal. No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Here's some of the arguments I've heard. Oh, he's gonna get back in. He's so scary. Well, you got Dajjal in there right now. Maybe you're voting for Dajjal. I don't like Shaitan, so I'll vote for Dajjal.
Yeah. Many Muslims have voted for 46 after the last election, but then, it comes to an issue like Palestine. The first thing he says is, I'm not a Jew, but I'm a Zionist. And then he is the one president who has done the least to stop Israel from committing
So 45 probably would have done the same thing, but the point of it is we can't go off of emotion. Like there has to be something. We can't just be one issue voters either. I'm sorry. And this is a problem that many, to be frank with you, there's a movement called Abandon Biden. There's many African American Muslims who are not down with the Abandon Biden movement.
Yeah.
I'm telling you right now, because they view both sides as not helping Palestinian people, but for African American Muslims, there are other more imminent day-to-day issues than just simply Palestine, and we have to understand that, right? So, but at least we should come down to the table as different groups of Muslims and at least discuss these things. We don't do this, so this is a big problem too. And again, it's hard to organize in times of crisis. when we have healthy hearts and we are working outside crisis, when the crisis comes, then we can naturally coalesce and come together. And so again, a number of these things are just problems of the heart that we have to deal with. It's not simply just issues of political strategy. In my opinion, there is more political strategy that's needed, that's more sophisticated.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, a lot of our problems are heart problems, in my opinion. Allah knows best. I could be totally wrong.
Yeah.
Afwan, well, yeah. I think with that, I should conclude. I hope I didn't offend anyone again. I have to say that. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
Thank you all. Before you leave, if you'd like a signed copy of Imam Dawud's book, Blackness in Islam, how he brought some with him, and I think we'll do it in the conference room.
Yes. Wait, is this good? Is this good? I feel like, oh, I'm stopping it right now.